Good morning, friends. It's Steve from Southern Illinois again. I turned us around this week so that you can have the redbud in view the whole time. A little bit past its prime, but it's still beautiful. Still spring. Yesterday the sun was shining, the sky was blue. Today it's gray and cold and drippy, but it's still springtime. Last week we started on a new adventure, exploring the foundations for a spiritual life that are found in the lives of the men and the women of the Bible. I'm calling this series Touchstones. A touchstone was a flat piece of basalt or jasper, a very fine-grained stone that's been used for a long time in many different cultures for determining how pure gold is. Gold is always mixed with other metals, and depending on the alloy, it has more or less gold in it. So even today we gauge how much gold is present in an alloy by using a touchstone. You streak the touchstone, rub the gold against it, and the color of the streak can tell you how pure that gold alloy is. One of the functions of the Bible in my life is as a touchstone. When I rub up against the Bible, compare my life to the lives of the people in the Bible, I learn things about myself. So last week I asserted that our concept of spirituality has evolved as our culture has rejected its religious origins, the religious aspects of its origins. This week I've been on the fringes of some conversations between some of my friends who are, I have termed spiritual but not religious, and I've learned some things. Even my use of the term spiritual but not religious makes me somewhat dated, because the only people today who use that terminology appear to be religious people, and they do it in a somewhat disparaging fashion. Well, you're spiritual but not religious. That was never my intention. As I studied this week after hearing some of these conversations, I discovered that in the last 2 decades, the term spiritual has largely been replaced by the term meaningful. Instead of a spiritual life, we speak of a meaningful life. This has been part of the positive psychology movement that has swept through both the educational domain and the psychology domain in Western culture. And this emphasis on wellness, on positivity, on helping people to live meaningful lives is something I applaud. It's been missing for a long time. Doctors know more about how the body breaks than they do about how to keep it well. My intention in bringing this up today, though, is not to try to dive into why those changes have happened, okay? But more it's to affirm that while I've been using the language in an archaic fashion, it's not been because of disparagement on my part. In no way do I want to demean the efforts of people who are striving to live a meaningful life, a life full of purpose and significance, fulfillment and satisfaction. That is a worthy, a plausible goal, even when you do it without religion. What I'm striving to bring into the conversation is a sharing of what I have found in Christianity and more specifically in the Bible, that has furthered my own efforts towards that end. So back to the topic at hand. Accepting the believability of God is the bedrock of spirituality, of finding a meaningful life in the lives of the people in the Bible. But if we choose to believe in a God, that begs the question, what God? Who is he? What is he like? And this is a question that permeates the Bible. It's a question that people in the Bible asked as well, that they had to answer during their lifetimes. And almost every story in the Bible unveils answers to another facet of those questions, those discoveries that they had. And it's central to what the New Testament calls the gospel, the good news. Today I want to explore just a couple of facets of that. But first of all, a story. 1975 was a big year in my life. Okay, it was the transition between being a big fish in a little pond, high school, and being a little fish in a big pond, college. And it was pretty traumatic for me, okay? I was already semi-emancipated. My parents lived in Jamaica. I was going to school back here in the U.S., and I really didn't have any mentors in my life, so I was kind of finding my way along by myself. It was a big transition. But it was a very significant year in the life of American culture as well. It was the year that a gag gift topped the most wanted gift lists across the nation. It all started that summer. In the summer of 1975, a young man named Gary, who lived in California, went out with some friends to a bar. They were getting together for the evening. They were all from the marketing industry. They were marketers, and they had a lot to talk about that evening. And as the evening went on, conversation turned to the topic of pets and the trouble that they cause in our lives. Yeah, pets can be a real hassle. You got to remember to feed them, you got to remember to water them, change the potty box or the newspaper, whatever you use. Okay, you're always cleaning up after them. And some of his friends had cats, and they moaned and groaned about how the cats would scratch at their furniture or scratch at their door. We used to have cats, okay? When the kids were growing up, we had a whole passel of cats. And the woodwork around our doors still has these deep scratches in it. Maybe I'll replace the woodwork in the house before we move. But you know what? There's so many scratches all through our house. Pets can be a real nuisance. And when you go on vacation, what do you do with them? Take them with you, leave them at home. Who feeds them? Who waters them? Who gives them the TLC that keeps them from going crazy and scratching everything? Yeah. Pets can be a real hassle. As Gary was listening to all of this, and he felt kind of left out of the conversation because he didn't have a pet, never had a pet, didn't want a pet, wasn't interested in a pet, but everybody else was talking about pets. And so finally he quipped, well, I don't know what you guys are all talking about. I don't have any of these problems. My pet's perfectly behaved, never gives me a bit of trouble. And his friend said, really? What kind of pet do you have? Is it a guppy? He said, no, it's a pet rock. Which got a big laugh. And some of his friends said, man, I wish I had one of those. It was just a joke. But when his friends responded positively, Gary, the marketer, thought, wow, what would be the possibility? So he went home that night and he immediately started work on his magnum opus. The care and training of your pet rock. Let me read to you a little bit about this, okay? Congratulations. You are now the owner of a genuine, pedigreed pet rock. Important. Do not remove your pet rock from its box before reading item number 1 in this booklet. Item 1. Your new rock is a very sensitive pet and may be slightly traumatized from all the handling and shipping required to bring the two of you together. While you may look in on your new pet from time to time, it is essential that you leave your rock in its box for a few days. It's advised that you set the box in an area of your home that is to become your pet rock's special place. Some pet rock owners have found that the ticking of an alarm clock placed near the box has a soothing effect, especially at night. And so on and so on. Instructions on how to feed your rock, how to water your rock, instructions on how to train your rock to come, a very difficult skill for rocks to master. Sit. Be careful, because your rock will try to lay down thinking that you won't notice. Or roll over, play dead. You get the idea. It was a total spoof, a total gag. So when they began selling like hotcakes, everybody was surprised. By the middle of December, Gary estimated that he was shipping 100,000 pet rocks per day. You heard that. Okay? I mean, they came in this cute cardboard box that looked like a mix between a McDonald's Happy Meal and a pet carrier. It had holes in the sides so your rock could breathe during transport, and inside your rock was cradled in a soft bed of Excelsior, aka wood shavings. Who knows why they sold so well? The Vietnam War had just ended with all the turmoil that entailed in the American culture. That was followed shortly afterwards with Watergate, and the mood throughout the country was kind of pessimistic and downbeat and disillusioned. And somehow this humorous, offbeat, totally nonsensical gift just touched a chord in American culture, and people bought them like crazy. For a while. By March, sales of pet rocks had almost dried up entirely. Why? Why would something sell so drastically, so quickly, and then poof, disappear? Well, it's because the inanimate can never meet our emotional and social needs the way an animate can. A pet rock can never meet our needs the way a cat. Yes, even a cat meets emotional needs. You know, I have a cat that stops by once a day and wants to rub itself up against me and have me pet it. But if I touch it in the wrong place, but even pet cats can meet emotional needs. I personally am a dog person. Yeah, Vivian doesn't like this to be known, but I talk to dogs. You know, I bark at them when I walk past, and we have conversations, okay? Meaningful conversations on my part. I don't know what I'm saying to them, but they seem to enjoy talking to me. Friends, God is not a pet rock. He's not an inanimate thing. As the people in the Bible related to him, he was personal and he was compassionate. When you read the stories in the Bible, starting right in the Garden of Eden, There's some strange things about the Garden of Eden, okay? When the story of creation is told, God speaks of himself in the plural. Let us make man in our image. Now, the rest of the Bible goes out of its way to say God is one. But here at the beginning, God's talking about himself in the plural. He talks about himself in relational terms. And then when he creates living things, he creates male and female, birds, fish, animals, male and female. But when he makes man, humans, he only makes one, a male. And then he says, you know what? It's not good for a man to be alone. And so he splits us into two, male and female. Strange. Why would he do that? Did he make a mistake and have to correct it? Yeah, I've heard the feminist joke, God made man first and then he figured out what was wrong, so he made the females. But I think there's a deeper meaning to this. All of this strangeness in the story of the beginnings is because God is trying to emphasize to us that we need each other, that relationships are important. Relationships between humans, both male and female and generally, and relationships with God. He is a relational God. And then when Adam and Eve rebel, when sin enters the picture, God doesn't just sit back and say, yeah, you can't win them all. Off with that experiment, okay? They blew it. No, he comes looking for them. He doesn't wait for them to figure out they made a mistake. He comes looking for them. How does the Bible end? Well, in Revelation, the Bible ends with a description of the new world, and here's how it's described. I heard a loud voice speaking from the throne. Now God's home is with people. He will live with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more pain, no more grief or crying. The old things have disappeared. That's in Revelation 21, verses 3 and 4. Part of what Vivian calls the happy ending to the Bible. That's the picture of God that the men and women of the Bible experienced in their lives. This God who wants to be with us, to live with us, to wipe away our tears. You see, God is compassionate. It's very easy to confuse empathy and compassion. Empathy is feeling what I feel. If I am empathetic towards you, I feel what you feel. I cry when you cry. I laugh when you laugh. I get giddy when you get giddy. Compassion is not just empathy. Yes, compassion identifies the feeling, the emotional state of another person, but it doesn't stop there. Compassion acts. Now, sometimes that act is solving problems. Sometimes that act is just listening. Sometimes that act is sitting next to a fireplace or a campfire and just being with the other person. Compassion takes many different forms, but the key to it is that while empathy feels, compassion acts. And from beginning to end, God is a God of action. He comes looking for Adam and Eve in the garden. He comes giving Noah instructions on how to create the ark to save as many people as possible. He calls Abram out of his homeland and sends him on a journey, on a mission. God acts throughout the Bible. But the goal is always the same. Okay? Sometimes his actions are confusing. Sometimes he doesn't act when we think he should act, and sometimes he acts in ways we question. But his objective is always the same: to bring sin and the death and suffering and dysfunction that it has created in our lives and in the world in general, to bring sin to an end. The old things are passed away. I have created a new world. That's the objective that God has throughout the Scripture. And that's the objective he has in your life and mine. Now, don't get offset by the term sin. We'll explore that later, because that's a very critical element in the touchstones of a spiritual life that we find in the men and women in the Bible. Okay? But for right now, I want to focus on who God is: personal and compassionate. That's the center around which the spiritual life of the men and women in the Bible was built. Okay? We live in a world that was designed and created by a personal, compassionate God. We were designed to live compassionately, intimately with other people, and with God. No wonder loneliness and a lack of meaning or significance are so painful for me, so painful for all of us. No wonder my heart cries out for intimacy and love. Christianity does not begin with addressing and solving the intellectual problems. It begins by meeting the needs of the heart. And one of the core needs of the human heart is for a meaningful life, a life of significance, a life of purpose, and a life of intimacy. My experience has been that centering my life on God, striving to become more like Him, has brought this meaning and purpose into my life in a way that I did not find previously when I put my faith in impersonal sources of wisdom, philosophy, science, education, material things. None of them provided me with the satisfaction, the meaning that this God has. So I invite you today. Last week I invited you to take the risk of believing in God. This week I'm inviting you to accept Him as someone who's personal, who cares about you, compassionate, active. Be safe, my friends. Be prudent. But above all, keep looking up. I'll see you next week.